Hi, in this video we're going to look at multi-criteria decision making. So the scenario is that we have uh, a few alternates and we are uncertain about the outcomes of these alternates because of the conditions. So so here, let's say we do an example where we have three alternates. We have stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. But we don't really know the market is going to do. So it is possible that the market could do very well, or it could be a normal market, or it could be a declining market. In each case, the returns would be different. So, for instance, if it was stocks and the market was doing well, we might say that we can make $100, and if the market is not that great, we might end up losing some money. So this is basically, so for each cell, we're basically saying that if we pick this alternate and this condition was true, then that's the return we would get. So this is called a payoff table. So we start by making a payoff table. Now the way you take a decision will depend on your risk tolerance. So if you are someone who's a very optimistic person, you might go for a very risky position that gives you a lot of return. Um, if you're a risk avoider, you try to go for a position that prevents you from running into a loss. And a risk neutral person would reach a decision by trying to weigh the effect of all the different states and coming to a decision. So let's start with the optimistic person, so a risk taker. We would call this type of decision a Maxi-Max decision. Now, why is it called a Maxi-Max? I'll explain how that works. So, whenever you look at these decisions, so there's max and max. There's two maxes. So the first thing that you do is you get the maximum of all possible returns for stocks. So the maximum possible return for stocks is, so that's 45. So we put 45 here. And the maximum possible return for mutual funds is 53. So we put 53 in this column. So now in this column we have all the maximum possible return. So an optimistic person would pick the maximum of these returns. That's why it's a maxi-max. So out of the maximums, you pick the maximum. So the maximum out of this is 70. And that means that we would be selecting what? We would be selecting stocks as our decision. Okay. Now we're going to look at the pessimistic way of reaching this decision. In pessimistic scenario, what you want to avoid is running into a loss. So here, if you look at the way it's set up, it's called a Maxi-Min. So what we want to do is, let's look at what is the minimum, let's look at all the minimum possible returns that we can get in each situation. For stocks, the minimum possible return is 13. For bonds, it's 5. And for mutual funds, it's -5. So you pick the maximum of this, that would be 5. Okay, so what you're really trying to do is you're saying you're assuming that the market is going to be worst case, and you want to pick up the best return that you can get in a worst case market. So in this case, we end up with bonds. What if we try to factor in, so you're for a risk neutral person, the person would consider all the possible cases and then try to figure out what makes sense. So one of the ways that they would go about doing this is to say, what would be my average return I'm not assuming that the market's going to go up, down, or remain steady. I'm just going to say what is the average return that this investment will give me. So the average of all these returns would be, so basically taking um, so it'll be 70 plus 30 minus 13 and taking it divided by 3, so that's 57 over 3, and that gives us 29. In this case it's 40 plus 45 plus 5, that gives us 90, and the average comes out to be 30. And in the last case, it's 53 plus 45 minus 5 over 3, so that's gives us 93 over 3, which is 31. So in this case, um, the best average that we can see is for mutual funds, which is 31. So then we would say, okay, so we would select this choice. Okay. Now, another type of decision that you could take is called minimum regret. So a regret is going to happen, let's say, if you were in a best case market and you had ended up investing in stocks, your return would be 70. So you'd be very happy. But what if you had invested into bonds? If you had invested into bonds, you would have made 30 less than the person that invested in stocks. So you have a regret. You say, well, I wish I'd done stocks. I could have made $30 extra. So you calculate the regret. So in each case, so there's you take the maximum in this scenario. So in the best case market, the maximum return is 70. So 70 minus 0, there is no regret if you bought stocks. If you bought bonds, you would have a regret of 30. And if you had mutual funds, you would get a regret of. Now, if you were in steady market, then the best return you could get 45. But if you ended up investing in stocks, then your regret would be 45 minus 30. So that's going to be 15. If you invested in bonds, 45 minus 45, so there's no regret. Invested in mutual funds, again, zero regret. If it was a worst case market and you invested into stocks, then your regret would be 5 minus 13, and that would be 18. And if you invested in bonds, you have no regret. If you invested in mutual funds, then your regret would be 5 minus 5 and 10. Now we look at the maximum regret for stocks. So the maximum regret for stocks is here, which is 18. The maximum regret if you had bonds is 30, so put 30 here. And the maximum regret if you bought mutual funds would be 17. So put 17 here. And since we are trying to get the minimum of this maximum regret, so then clearly it would be, so the minimum, the lowest value out of these three is 17. And hence we would go and pick mutual funds. Okay, so now we did averaging, and averaging assumed that every state has an equal chance, so 1/3 chance of anything happen. But let's say we had better information and we could look back at the trend of the market, and turns out that 20% of the time the market has been increasing over the last few years. 50% of the time it was steady, and 30% of the time it was declining. So now we use these weights to, instead of doing an average, we do a weighted average. And a weighted average would be, so we take, so it would be 70 into 0.2, that gives us 14, and 40 into 0.2, that's gives us 8, and 53 into 0.2 would give us 10.6. And here, so multiply the weight here, so it will be 30 into 0.5, that's a 15, 45 into 0.5, that's 22, and then finally worst case, so it's 13 into 0.3, that's minus 3.9, and then 5 into 0.3 would give us 1.5, minus 5 into 0.3, minus 1.5. So you basically now have to total up these values, and if we total up these values, we get in this case we're getting so that we get 25.1. That's the total. 32 is the total for bonds, and 31.6 is the total for mutual funds. So here we see that the expected monetary value for bonds is the highest. Okay, so we go ahead and pick bonds now. Okay. Now, what if you could predict the market? Let's say you're investing over a couple of years, and each year you would know what to do. So let's say you know that this year is going to be the worst case, so you go ahead and invest in bonds. You find out next year is a steady market, so you could do bonds and mutual funds. And then a couple of years later, you know that it's going to be a it's growing market. You go ahead and invest into stocks. So somehow you've gotten perfect information. So every year you know what is the best investment that you should do. So that's like called having perfect information. So what would be the monetary value of perfect information? Or the monetary value of perfect information would be that for each case, so each scenario, so in the best case growing market, stocks is the best, so you would multiply stocks with the likelihood of that market. In the most likely, bonds and mutual funds, either one, so I'll say okay, I'll multiply this by 4.5, and in the worst case scenario, so bonds are the best, and I'll multiply this by the value, the payoff multiplied by 0.3. So basically, so you've got, so this is 1.5, and we've got 22.5, and this is 14. So you add them up, and you basically get 38. So 38 is what you get if you had perfect information. Every time that you're investing, you know where to invest. Now you compare that with the monetary value that we got earlier, okay, when we didn't have perfect information. So the monetary value there in the last slide was 32. So this difference is basically the value of information. This is called the value of information. 38 minus 32 minus 32 is 6. So 6 is the best possible return that you could get, and that is if you had perfect information, and 32 is what you would have gotten without having that information. So that tells you that the value of this information is $6. So if the methods that you can use for multi-criteria decision making, where you have alternates and